I'm thrilled to be talking to one of my best friends, Christian van Nieuwerburgh. He's published numerous books about coaching. I can't keep up. There are so many, but every time I see one, I get it so I can get him to autograph it the next time I see it. Last one he and I talked about was the advanced coaching book that he wrote, which essentially talks about the paradoxes of coaching. It's a well, it's about advanced coaching. It's really fantastic to make you think broadly about what coaching is and what it can be. His book, Essential Skills for Coaches, I'm not sure if I have the title right, but I would say that book is a must-have book if you have any role in leadership, whether it's not just coaching, but any kind of role where you communicate. And then Christian has many other books. Great one about coaching for leaders, Essential Guide to Leadership Coaching by what he wrote with John Campbell, and wrote one book about coaching in Islamic cultures, and numerous other books about coaching. Wrote probably the first major publication coming out of the UK about coaching and education, and he's one of the top leaders in coaching around the world in education. And I have loved his books. I go back to the skills book probably weekly, but I've learned more watching Christian as he coaches other people. And a lot of the things I've learned about coaching skills, I've read the books and I looked at the different things, and I've spent a lot of time with Christian and John, but I've really learned it watching Christian coach. He's a masterful coach. He's a ninja listener. It's really a joy to watch him. And today we're going to flip the script, as our publication stuff says. And so Christian's in charge. He gets to ask me questions about the new book. I'll just give you my visual right here. The Definitive Guide to Instructional Coaching. I wanted to create one book that anybody who's interested in instructional coaching could get, that would have all this. So we have like a whole bunch of books, but that if you're an administrator and you're like, what does my instructional coach do, or whatever your position should be, that's what I tried to create here. And it's short. It's less than 65,000 words. And I asked Christian if he'd be so kind as to talk with me about the instructional coaching book, or whatever he wants to talk about. And he graciously agreed. And what time is it, Christian? Is it 10 o'clock for you right now, or 11 o'clock?
It's just 9 p.m. So it's still early.
Okay. Well, that's not too bad then. Okay, good. So I'll turn it over to you, but Christian, thank you so much. As I said before we got on, I'm fortunate enough that since we have a partnership with Growth Coaching, I get to interact with you frequently, and it is always a life-giving conversation. And I'm always energized after we talk. So I'm looking forward to today, especially since you're in charge and I just get to answer. I think it's great. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. And what a pleasure it's going to be. As you say, Jim, the conversations are life-giving, and I so appreciate them. Not only are you a leading figure in the field of coaching and education, but a best-selling author and a personal friend, which is, for me, one of the strongest connections. So let's just talk about the book. So first of all, I want to congratulate you. I think it is a masterpiece, and I do think that this is one of those books 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now will be considered, well, there's the definitive, and that's what it's called, the Definitive Guide to Instructional Coaching. And when you were, I think in the preface, you were kind of saying this idea of the definitive guide was the northern point on a compass for you. It's almost like the compass, and you're heading towards it. Are you okay to say a little bit about your journey towards this book?
Well, first off, thanks for the question. I felt a little uncertain about the title because it sounds pretty cocky. Like, this is the book you have to read about instructional coaching, and there's some hubris. Maybe I was worried about pride going before a fall. But what I wanted to do with that title is bring focus to the writing, to say I want to create a concise, accessible book that summarizes the work of over 20 years. And, there's a book on instruction, there's a book on playbooks, there's a book on evaluating coaching. Before that, there's a book, Better Conversations, there's a book on using video. And I wanted to put all the pieces together in one place and make it concise and accessible without being superficial. And so the idea was to hold that goal in front of me, that people could pick up the book. It would be easy to understand, but it wouldn't be fluffy. It'd have depth to it and sort of tell the whole story. And I do believe, people often say, well, you got a lot of books. Which one should we read first? This would be the one I would say. This is the place to go to. If you want one, if you're only going to read one book, this would be the one to look at.
Wonderful. Because, I've known you, I'm lucky to have known you for, I realize, over 10 years now, maybe 12. And I do recall once in the University of Kansas, we were in your office and you actually drew on there was a whiteboard, and you were kind of talking about the different publications that you were working on. So this is the definitive guide in the sense that it connects all of the other pieces of writing. Is that right?
I think it summarizes them, and because it's built around these 7 factors, they function as kind of a rubric or an assessment for saying, have we taken care of this? And it also helps you define instructional coaching, how it's different than other approaches to coaching. So growth coaching, which you've written about and which I see you as a great promoter of and practitioner as well, is one approach, and instructional coaching is a different approach. And so this defines the similarities and differences. And then says, if you're going to go the instructional coaching route, here's the 7 big things to think about.
Can you tell us, Jim, very briefly, what are the 7 success factors of successful instructional coaching?
Sure. And I organized the book around 3 categories. And the first one is, who am I? And the first factor is the set of beliefs that guide your work. And I believe that a lot of professional development is grounded in a set of principles that don't honor the dignity and the humanity of the teachers who are experiencing the professional. That is, some external person is telling this person what to do. And sometimes it happens in organizations that have a deep love of control. And so it's not actually empowering. It's not actually something that makes you have more efficacy. You feel diminished because you're just being told what to do. And it's like your brain doesn't matter. And, I did the research on the partnership principles with my dissertation. And so that the first part is positioning yourself as a partner, as a peer. And I think our beliefs are quite similar in terms of the facilitative approach to coaching, which I would say growth coaching is, and our approach. They're grounded in the belief that if anybody has more power, more importance in this conversation, it should be the teacher, not me. I'm here to help the teacher maybe get clear on what their goal is and help them realize the goal. But I'm not here to get them to do anything. I'm not here to give them my advice. So the first thing is a set of principles. We call them the partnership principles. Second thing is the communication skills that you use. And honestly, no one's influenced my thinking about the communication skills, the coaching skills more than you have. Your work's really shaped my thinking. And in this book, the Better Conversations has a number of 10 different communication habits and beliefs. But in this book, I just talk about 3 things as being essential. And the chapter on communication skills, it's the way you listen and the way you ask questions. And to summarize that really quickly, when you listen, you focus on the person and you make sure you don't jump ahead of them as they're talking, because your brain moves faster than their talking goes. And so you work hard to genuinely take it in without assumptions, just to hear what they say. And to do that, you have to sort of let go of control. I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to listen. And then that's how it happens inside you. But then externally, you need to look like you're listening. And I've come to believe that if you're listening, then the person knows. And so, because you've probably had the experience, and I've been on both ends of this, where you say to somebody, you're not listening. You probably wouldn't say it that, and then they repeat back everything you just said. Well, I think if you don't look like you're listening, you're not listening. Part of listening is to communicate to the person, you matter to me, and I am listening, and you have my full attention. And you describe that better than anybody. And then questions are generative questions, not leading questions, not questions that are designed to take the person to, not probing questions. I hate the word probing. Who wants to be probed? It doesn't sound good to me. But invitational and generative questions, you wanted to sum it up quickly, questions you don't know the answer to. So that would be and I would say listening and questioning are to coaching like skating is to ice hockey. You can't really play unless you can do the two things reasonably effectively. And then the third thing is the way you lead yourself and the way you lead others. And leading yourself is about understanding what you're trying to accomplish, what your purpose is, and then making sure it's happening. And then leading others is about interacting in another way, as Liz Wiseman would say, as a multiplier to help them become more. And also having your act together, but being deeply respectful of teachers. So this Jim Collins said, ambitious for change, but humble and responsive and supportive to the other. You're ambitious for the change because of the bigger reasons for it, not because of you. And it's not for your ego. So that's the first part, the beliefs, communication skills, and the leadership approaches, the leadership strategies. Second part, first part's who am I? Second part is what do I do? And so we have a process we call the impact cycle. And it begins with getting a clear picture of reality and then setting goals and then identifying a way to hit the goal. Now, often what happens is a teacher already knows what they want to do. And so you run with their thing. And it's very similar to growth coaching, essentially, in the sense that if they already know what to do, then we're going to run with that. But at times, and what differentiates instructional coaching from other forms of coaching, most forms you'd hear about if you went to a coaching conference, is we share practices when appropriate. And the coach is a peer talking to a peer, but they're a peer with expertise that can be tapped into, but always shared with the teacher making the decision. There's no sense in which I'm trying to talk you into this. And I think the only approach to take is a humble approach, because nothing's guaranteed in the classroom. It's too complicated. So I just say, well, what do you think about this? Do you think this would be worth? And I know a fair bit about it. I can share it with you, and then you can do it however you want. And so the autonomy of the other person's completely honored, and their capacity to think for themselves is completely honored. And the impact cycle is about sort of moving through a process of clear reality, setting a goal, the teacher getting ready to implement the new strategy, making plans, and sometimes learning about something. And then recognizing the complexity of the classroom, making adaptations. You have to keep modifying things, changing things so you can hit the goal. It's not likely whatever you do first is going to work. You're going to have to mess with it. And then in order to do that, you need to understand, well, what are the teaching practices I share? And so we talk about creating a playbook, a core document that summarizes those practices. And then how do you set goals and monitor progress towards the goal? So we talk about gathering data on engagement and achievement. So each week, the teacher can sort of see how well they're doing in their pursuit of the goal. And for engagement, often it's emotional engagement. Do the kids feel safe in school? Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they have hope? Do they feel positive? And for achievement, it's different ways of measuring knowledge, skills, and big ideas. So the first part, who am I? Second part, what do I do? Third part is, where do I work? And so what needs to be in place for a coach to succeed? Well, there needs to be administrators who understand what coaching is all about. That's why I wrote the book, is so they can read that book and see what it's all about. You need theoretical alignment. If you have a top-down principal with a partnership coach, it's going to be hard for them to work. Maybe most important, the coach needs to have time to do the work of coaching. If they're asked to do a much attribute, every 4 hours a week you take away is probably one less person or more that the coach can work with. And so every time you add one more thing on the coach's shoulders, there are fewer people they can coach. And we talk about learning architecture. So ideas are shared within the system, and evaluation systems that are not designed for teachers or principals, but they're really designed for coaches to help the coach improve. And it's a long answer, but hey, I spent 2 years writing the book. I can't get any shot. So there's who I am. That's my beliefs, the way I communicate and coach, the coaching skills, how I lead. What do I do? The impact cycle, which involves sometimes sharing teaching practices that I understand really well. And it involves gathering data about setting goals, and then and where I work, what the whole thing looks like where I work. what are the things that need to be in place so the coach can flourish? That's the whole idea. And I'd say the big thing, if I was going to give you one sentence to sum it up, is I feel it's almost like there's two camps. We're going to go in and tell the teacher what to do, or we're going to let the teacher explore and figure it out on their own, and we're not going to share any ideas. And the argument on the right is kids need help, and we need to get the teachers up to speed really quickly, or the kids are going to falter. And the argument on the other side, if you want to call it the left, is we don't want to impose on the teacher, because if we start to share ideas, it puts us one up and puts them one down. And we want an equitable thing, because if we're not equitable, then it's dehumanizing to the teacher. And pretty quickly, they're just going to say, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And what I would say is you can take the partnership approach implicit in the facilitative model and share ideas in a way that doesn't diminish the other and that doesn't upset the power dynamics of the relationship. That's the heart of instructional coaching. And we need some way to access what the research says on effective instruction. Somehow, if we want to learn that stuff, billions of dollars has been spent identifying effective practices. We need to share it in a way that's grounded in real life, that's inside out change, and that at the end of it, as you say, the person has an action plan, they have clarity about what they want to do, and they feel energized. I think that's what we're striving for.
Thanks, Jim.
Are we out of town now? I think I used up all our time with it.
It's a very helpful summary, and it was great to hear you set out what's the kind of the bottom line of what you're saying. And what I loved about the book is the structure of it. I particularly liked starting with the person themselves. I think moving outwards from that to, who am I? What do I do? And then what needs to be in place around. I can see that that's helpful for an administrator's perspective, as well as I think this book is going to be wonderful for instructional coaches, because they can kind of check, are all of these things in place? Now, in the section about, and the book is full of, I think there is a bringing together of what you've written, but there's a lot of new perspectives and insights in it as well. And in the section about leading yourself, if I can ask you a slightly personal question, Jim, you talk about having read Ikigai, and you said, it's a great book, read it. You mentioned that you took on board some of the ideas in Ikigai and for yourself. Are you okay to share an example of how you took something away from that book?
So what they did for that book, as I'm sure you know, is the authors who wrote it look for places in the world where people live the longest. And I think it's Okinawa, Japan. They found a little island off the coast of Japan, and that has the most people. I don't know if it's per capita, but the most people over 100 of anywhere else in the world. And they wanted to find out what is it and what's the secret. And one of the things was the people had the way they put it is the people had a reason to get up in the morning. They knew what it was to do. It's strange, just to make it really personal. I was just thinking about my father, who passed away just today, and how I'm wondering if he lost that purpose. And it was sort of like, I wonder if I should have done something so he didn't lose his purpose, But the idea of purpose, they have it as having several elements. So what do I love to do? What am I good at? What does the world need? And what can I get paid to do? And so I've been in a process of sort of reflection now for a while on, am I doing the things I most love to do? And am I doing the things that have the biggest positive impact? And, probably writing proposals for research grants and sitting in meetings are not high on my list of things I love to do. And but reading and growing and writing are pretty high, and so how can I structure my life so that I'm doing the things that matter? And, I have this tape measure pinned to my bulletin board in my office, and I'm 66 right now, so I cut it off at my age, And then I have it up to, it's 100 now that I'm striving for, but and saying, well, I've got from 66 to 100. And then every year when another year passes, I cut the tape measure down. So this June, it'll be 67. And then I take some time, a few hours to reflect on, well, what did I do with that life, with that year? And given the limited amount I've got, is the things I'm doing right now the most important things? Now, there's a certain element of privilege to this. If I'm a single mom and I'm trying to do 2 jobs, right now I just need to feed my kids and keep them safe. And that is my purpose. I think you're in a kind of a privileged position when you look at these 4 things and say, I'm going to reflect on this and change it. But nonetheless, that's how I do it. I think deeply about what my purpose, and then the next part becomes, do I build time do I use my time in a way that allows me to do those things? And so this year I've set aside 3 months where I'm pretty much going to be out of touch. And during those 3 months, see, again, this is privilege. I'm fortunate that I can do this, but during those 3 months, I'm reflecting on the life-giving conversations research I'm doing. I'm reading as many books as I can. I'm writing, because once I get back to doing the work of, or doing all the things we do, all the little emails you have to deal with, the meetings you go to, there won't be time to pause and think deeply about what I'm doing. So in order to do the work that I think is most important, I have to block it. And then I do that on a daily level or weekly level too. I look at my calendar and try to fit in the things that are most important.
Thank you, Jim. And I'm sorry for your loss.
Well, it was many years ago, but I just, you've experienced it recently with your mom, and
yeah,
it's the people are still with you and you still reflect back on things. And, that's just what was happening this morning.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you, Jim, for sharing that. And, I think what you've said about Ikigai and what you recommend in the book, it does resonate. And for each person, it'll be individual, but, just kind of reflecting on that and taking that quality time. And as you say in the book, for busy educators to find some of this time can be difficult. And you do say, look, having a coach is one way to create this time. So I think that's really helpful. Another aspect of your book and you do say this in your book, you're like, I'm going to talk about partnership principles again. And it's something that really, for me, underpins everything about instructional coaching and the way that you interact with it. And, I'm sure, like many people on listening to this, you're my role model for living by the partnership principles. And it was, I think, about, again, 12 years ago when we probably first met in London, and you were talking about instructional coaching. And I took away not just instructional coaching, but I thought what's amazing is how you, as an educator and a facilitator, were modeling the partnership principles. You talked to us about them. You'd given us a presentation about them. But I was thinking, and you're role modeling them. So thank you for that, Jim, for role modeling that. And it's definitely inspired me. In this book, I think you go beyond what you've said before about partnership principles. Are you okay just to share any thinking, any new perspective or understanding about the partnership principles?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because I have been thinking about it quite a bit. You'd think, haven't you thought it out yet? You've been doing that for, a decade. But, just to go back to our first meeting, I met you, Jonathan Passmore, and Sir John Whitmore all on the same weekend. So it was a heck of a weekend to see some of these giants in coaching. It was pretty cool. So what I am interested in is how our beliefs shape our actions and how our actions shape our beliefs. And there are those who would argue that if you change the person's beliefs, they have to change their beliefs to change their actions. And there are others behaviorists, I guess, who would say, you need to change your actions, and then in turn, your beliefs will change. And what I've come to believe and been thinking about, I've tended to be more a behaviorist. We act ourselves into different beliefs. But for example, a teaching practice. I don't really get it until I try it out. And then I go, oh, now I really believe in it. I have to experience it to change. But I think they're both important, the beliefs and the actions. And so what I've been thinking about is, okay, so what are the questions that would show that I believe in the partnership beliefs? And so I've created a list of questions, and I'll just run through them quickly. So for equality, my question is, do I interrupt other people? And do I judge other people? And Nancy Klein, in a book that you taught me about, she says that she said, I am a card-carrying believer in equality. I think every person should count. Every life matters. She said, but I don't really believe it because I keep interrupting all the time. And she's written about interrupt. She's interrupting. We're all in trouble. But I think, if I really believe in equality, because when I interrupt, I'm saying, hey, I'm more important than you. And let me just say my thing and let me get in there. And so because I believe at a nominal level in equality, I want my actions to reflect it. And so if I ask myself, am I interrupting? It helps me think about equality. And then same thing with judging. If I'm moralistically judging another person, I'm saying, I don't know, how can they drive like that? How can whatever it is, in that moment of judgment, I'm putting myself up here and I'm putting them down, and I'm not really living out the principle of equality. I'll just run through the other ones really quickly. For choice, can I let go of control? Can I let the other person decide? For voice, does the other person know that I think their opinion matters? That I really think what they have to say is valuable? Now, for dialogue, it's a little more complicated. It goes back to Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he said there are certain conditions for dialogue. One of those is humility, that I'm open to hearing the other person's perspective. And one of them is faith, which is I communicate to the other person I believe in them. I have faith in you. And the third one is that I genuinely want what's good for the other person. I engage my will for the good of the other person. He calls that love. You could call it benevolence. And he says, when you have humility, an openness to being shaped, when you communicate that you believe in the person, you have faith, and you have an attitude of benevolence, you engage your will for the other person, you communicate from a place of love. He said trust necessarily matters. And when you have trust, then you can have hope, and you can have critical thinking, and you can have a real dialogue. So for me, the questions for dialogue are, am I really open to being changed by what this person says? Do I communicate that I see their strengths, and do I focus on their strengths? And do I genuinely want what's best for them? Is that truly what's motivating me here? Or am I more concerned about what's best for me? And so I think to have a dialogue, if I really agree with that principle, those three things are there. And then reflection is really, do I resist the temptation to give advice? And do I let the person think for themselves? Your mantra, it's not about me, is a great one here. It's about the other person. And then praxis is there enough time for the person to try whatever we're doing? Or are we just focused on a goal and we're get out of here? Or are we genuinely going to deal with real life experiences? And then reciprocity is, am I more of a learner or a judger? And if I'm a learner, then we're probably going to have reciprocity. But if I'm judging them, moralistic judgment, it's a learning killer. It's an intimacy killer. I can't really be close to people that I'm rolling my eyes at when they're talking. It's not going to happen. And so that's been my recent thinking about partnership, is that those kinds of, now also, one of the principles is choice. Maybe people would have different questions. They might say, no, I can interrupt and it's still equal. And that's just the way my brain works. People should accept it or whatever. I think people have to determine their questions, but I do think those beliefs are played out in our actions. And I think to reflect on, do my actions really, because you can get seduced by saying, oh, I believe in equality and choice and voice and all those things, and then not do anything that embodies it. So to reflect through those questions, I think is helpful.
Thanks, Jim. And that's what I picked up from the book as well. That I think you used the word alignment about, okay, so you've got these principles, and you're right, Jim. And that's my first reaction when I saw the partnership principles is, yeah, I love these. Yes, of course, we want to do these. And I think many people come at it that way. So it's a great way in. But I think the questions you pose in the book are challenging because they give us pause to think, okay, I've espoused the principle. and it's a good principle, but am I living according to that principle on a daily basis? And I like what you've just said about, you can change the questions as well, but it's an important question to ask. How am I living by that principle on a daily basis? So thank you so much for elaborating on the partnership principles. I just want to ask a question about music, if that's okay, Jim.
Yeah, I love
it. Because there was, at one point, we were on a road trip, I remember, and we were listening to 1980s music, and it was a lot of fun. I think we connected over listening to the music, and we were driving for so long, you became good at predicting what the next song would be. Now, in this book, you do mention in your acknowledgements some of the musical figures who have supported this. So I guess my broad question is, how did music play a part in your writing of this book?
Well, obviously the obvious answer would be just that it's kind of nourishing to the soul, and we have two noisy dogs, so it kind of blocked out the dogs. It created an environment for that work. I think there's a similarity between being, I can't play any music. I mean, I used to play the harmonica a long time ago. But I think there's a similarity between being a musician and doing the work of writing. But I would say it's true of a chef, and it's true of an architect, and it's true of a stonemason. You know, there's an element of just trying to do the work as best you can, you know, and that, and for me, I think that's a really important part of life, is to, in this moment right now, just do it well, you know, and of course you're always compromised by time and all the stresses of writing and all that. But I think, you know, like John Coltrane's music essentially became like a prayer, you know, when he would improvise. Now, it's not for everybody, but if you could really get inside the heart of the person doing that, what he's trying to do, he's really trying to have kind of a spiritual experience. Now, I don't know if talking about gathering data about developing rubrics is quite the same as Coltrane doing his solos, but there is a sense, I think, in which we all try to do our best. And I think, you know, I'm very aware of the limits of time, how much little time we have. And I had this conversation with this person, and then I have this time to write. And I think I would like to think like a musician. I'm trying to do that. But I don't come, you know, I love to read, and I've read so many writers who are towering ahead of me in terms of the, you know, look at Atul Gawande or Annie Dillard, or any number of writers who are so inspirational in the way they write. To Annie Dillard, you could open up any of her books, close your eyes, put your finger on the page, and you're going to read a sentence better than anyone I've ever written in my life. I mean, her books, every sentence is just beautiful. But, you know, I am who I am, and I try to do the best I can, and I can maybe be a little closer to her with each new sentence, you know.
Thanks. So I love the way you've talked about there's a nourishing effect as well. And I think right now, with where we are as educators and coaches, this idea of thinking about what nourishes us is wonderful. But did I pick up about you being inspired by them doing the thing that they love to do? Is that?
Well, I think it's Thomas Merton, who's a mystic who died tragically very young. And I think he said something, whatever you do, and I'm paraphrasing and not remember it correctly, but whether you're hoeing a garden or writing a poem or whatever you do it as best you can. And he says, do it in a way that honors God. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody needs to have that concept, but at least it's it's an attempt to do something that speaks to the truths in you, I guess would be a way to put it. And so I think of Merton's idea of, and there's a famous mystic, Brother Lawrence, who, his form of prayer was washing dishes. So I think the great musicians, there's a sense in which probably a little bit of a flow experience, but they're immersed in it, and they're really being their best self as they do that work, and it's fundamental to who they are as a human being. And
Yeah.
It makes it sound like the writing is, I'm chopping out, grade 1 piano or something in the way I write compared to what they do with their music. But it is a sense in which I'm trying to do it as best I can. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that, because it does connect so well to the work of instructional coaches. And, I think there's something inspiring about seeing people do the best they can. And,
Right.
Seeing you do this, Jim, has always inspired me. And, before I even believed that I could work in coaching and education, you inspired me to do that. And I remember at Lawrence, Kansas, I did go up to you after the first institute, and I said, I want to work in this space. How can I get into it? How can I make it viable? And you did say to me, you said, just do good work. And I think that spirit is still there, and hopefully inspiring for everyone in the enterprise of education. And I love the idea that we're inspired when we see other people do the best they can. So now, you did say something in this that I also picked up in the book, and with a little bit of trepidation. I don't know why I have this trepidation with the word, but improv comes up in your book.
Right.
You mentioned it in the context of music. Can you say a bit more about how improv, the ideas of improv, are relevant to instructional coaches?
Yes, absolutely. Like, I think it's a great question. And I think that all coaches too, I wouldn't say just instructional coaches. I would think at least coaches who come from seeing coaching as a equal partnership kind of thing. When I sit down to talk about reality, say the teacher's watched a video of her lesson and I watch it, and now we're going to talk. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know where the conversation's going to go. If I come in with the intent to get that teacher to do something I've decided that he or she needs to do, I think that's actually dehumanizing. I think it's their goal. And, I might have ideas in my head. I might be thinking, if she picks this goal, that'll be easy. I can do that. But it has to be really that he picks the goal. And so that means, as a coach, I have a set of things I can do, but I don't know which way it's going to go. You talk about in your book on coaching skills, 3rd edition, about having a list of favorite questions. And so if I have my list of favorite questions, and then I can listen to the person, and then I can respond with a question that I've used previously. It's like Robbie Robertson, the guitarist for the band, the lead guitarist. He had certain riffs that he would play, but it was different every time. And he had memorized these different ways of playing music, but he used them in different ways at different times, and he improvised. But any musician has probably memorized different movements they can make, or riffs, or different ways they can do it. Same thing with coaching. And you ask the question, and then if the question works, it lands like sort of like intellectual dynamite. And you pose this question, and the person goes, "Oh, that makes," and then you're off. And but it's also, another analogy is tennis. Tennis is a bit speedy, but I don't know what I'm going to do until the ball comes over the net. And so I don't know where I'm going to go until I see what the other person, if I'm genuinely honoring the capacity of the other person to think, then what I do is in response to them. And so improvisation is just like that. And improvisational comedians, they say that one of the fundamental things is you have to be a good listener. Kate Murphy talks about improv in her book, You're Just Not Listening, which is a great book about listening. And so I have to really listen to you and then be able to respond. Because if I'm not listening, my response it's going to fall flat. It's not going to work. And so you have these things, you're ready to use them. They're different every time. And you respond to the person just like a tennis player responds to where the ball goes. You can't predict. You can make a guess, but you're not going to be able to do what you do until they do what they do.
Yeah, that really connects to the partnership principles as well. And I think when I said trepidation about improv, there is something about that, because there's the kind of, we don't know what's going to be happening. And so for coaches, instructional coaches and otherwise, I think that ability to be okay with, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but using oh, by the way, I am learning tennis right now.
I know, I was thinking about that.
It's funny because I have an excellent tennis coach. And the tennis coach says, don't worry how you're standing, don't. And he's kind of building up the repertoire you're talking about. He's saying, at the moment, you just need to learn the backhand, the forehand. And he's saying, don't worry about the other stuff yet. And I love that. And thinking about instructional coaches, then what about courage? Because as listening to you, I'm thinking, is it courage the right word? But to go onto stage as a musician or as a comedian, and you don't really know, if you're an improv comedian, what's going to happen. Is courage needed?
I want to talk about tennis first, and then we'll talk about whether the question is courage needed. Just to say that it was tennis that got Atul Gawande interested in coaching. So his article in the New Yorker, which a lot of people cite, he had a tennis coach. He was like on vacation somewhere, and he had a tennis coach, and the tennis coach helped him improve in a couple hours. He was a better tennis player, and he was like, we need to look into coaching. So that's where all that whole article came. We ended up doing a big study with surgeons on coaching. I don't know if it's courage. It might be courage, but I think you have to be able to let go of control. You have to be at ease with ambiguity. And you don't want to waste the person's time. And it is, as you say, a managed conversation. There are sort of there's a structure to what's happening. But I think you have to be. It may be courage in the sense that you have to be able to say, I really don't know what's going to happen in this conversation. And if you're a person who's wants to have everything buttoned down, and I want to have a plan, and then they need to do the plan, and it's all going to work out, I think you're not really honoring the capacity of the other person to be their professionalism. It's a little anti-professional to try to tell the other person what to do. So I think you have to, I guess you could say, you have to have the courage to be okay with ambiguity and with and letting the other person go where they want to go. And when you sit down with the coach, you have to be, wherever this goes is okay. But now at the same time, the way we would approach it is, if I think the teacher's making a big mistake in terms of the way they would implement practices, and this is probably where you and I differ to some extent, and I would say there's, a really skilled coach is one who has a number of different approaches depending on the situation. But if the teacher says, I'd like to do this practice, in the spirit of respecting the teacher, I can say, is it all right with you if I share a thought I've got about this? Now, I don't, your kids better than I do, and your class, and so just ignore this. And if they say yes, and then I'll say, let me share this, and you tell me what you think. If they feel I'm trying to tell them what to do, it doesn't work. It has to be, it's kind of like a menu of options, and here's just one more thing on the menu. Let's just put this in there, and you still get to choose. You still get to pick the fish you want to have. You can still look at it and pick the thing you want.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. You mentioned surgeons just there. So I have another question that is triggered when I was reading the book as well, which is, I know you've been passionate about education from when you were at university, and had a huge impact in education, not only across the US, but North America, globally. But to what extent do you think the book you've written would apply to, let's say, the health sector, you mentioned surgeons, or other sectors?
Yeah, I think the impact cycle is it's a structure for improving practice that honors the professionalism of the other person, whomever they might be. And I think you could use it in any profession that's complex. I don't think you would need. I think if what you're learning is something really simple, where the right and wrong are really crystal clear. Like, I don't really want the guy who the repairman who works on the engine of my jet. I don't want him to say, it feels good to me. I want him to get it right and, know how to do it. And I think in certain crafts, there are ways you do it that's black and white. This is the way you do it. This is the way you don't do it. But when you stand in front of a room of 30 students, there's no black and white. It's going to be complex, and there's who you are and who all those students are. And so there's no, like, this is the way it has to be that works out. And so to me, the impact cycle is helpful for complex work like that, whether it's being a surgeon or it's being a good therapist or whatever it might be. You could get better through the impact cycle.
Yeah, and your example is a good one, because even with my tennis lessons now, it is helpful for, this guy, John is his name. He was trained in the UK and in the US. And if he said to me, how do you think you should hold the racket? That's not what's needed at the moment. And I do love in the book, the complexity. You talk about, I think, two kinds of complexity, that classrooms and schools and districts are complex, but also that human beings are complex. Do you want to say something about complexity and how instructional coaching is helpful within that area of complexity?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing you're picking up on there. And what I would say, I forget the researchers' names now, but they looked at different types of tasks, and they said there are simple tasks. A simple task is baking a cake. And they said a complicated task, the complicated task is putting a person on the moon. Now, eventually, once you figured out how to do it, you do it the same way. There's checklists and procedures, and you can keep doing it. And they said a complex task is raising a child. And if one child is complex, how complex are 30 children? They're complex human beings. So you can't pull out a recipe like the way you would bake a cake to teach a class. At the same time, I think you need to have clarity about what you're doing, and you need to try things out. And that's why in the impact cycle, in the improvement stage, that's where we adapt what we do. And the teacher guides us as we talk about teaching practices. I don't say you have to do it this way. I say, let me describe how Brandy Sprick describes this, and then you see if you want to take it that way or you want to modify it. And once you got a goal, then the goal takes care of quality implementation, because you're not going to hit the goal without quality implementation. So the teacher sets a goal that really matters deeply to them, and then they get something explained to them really clearly so they can implement it. But then it doesn't work usually. And so then, because it's too complex, and so then you have to tweak it, you have to modify it. Sometimes you pick a different strategy completely. Sometimes you change how you're gathering data. But so sometimes people are a little resistant of instructional coaching because they're like, I don't like these checklists, and I don't want to have somebody come in and observe me. But the checklist is just the starting point. The checklist is just to be a clear way of describing something. You could co-construct the checklist with the teacher, to do it, and then the checklist, in a sense, is it's alive, because once you get into the improvement stage, you could throw it out completely or you could modify it, but you got to start somewhere. So start not being clear on what you're going to do is probably not the easiest way to go. So let's get clear on the starting point, then we'll make adaptations. And I think that's the only way to respond to complexity is to, if you start to just, Eric Louis said, hope I pronounced his name correctly, but he said, it's in education, it's never one size fits all. It's one size fits one. And that's the complex part. You have to adapt to that individual student and that individual teacher's way of going.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to hear it that way, because, one way to respond to complexity is not do anything and just think, well, it's too complex, too difficult. So the idea of having a coach, somebody with you, one who'll support you through it, but secondly, breaking it down into, well, what things can I do? And I love the idea of co-constructing a checklist as well. And you also talk in the book about making I think in relation to data, making the invisible visible. And so that's part of this as well.
Right. Well, I mean, the purpose of the data is for the teacher to be able to set a goal and then monitor progress towards the goal. Teresa Amabile at Harvard documented what she calls the progress principle, that for people who do complex work, seeing progress is really an important motivator. And you want to see that you're making progress frequently. And we would say every week. And so the data is a way of, it's imperfect. It's not going to accurately capture everything. And sometimes you have to change it because you say, I thought this was telling us what we want to see, but it's not telling. But the data helps you see it. Like, for example, let's say a teacher is really concerned about the kids feeling safe in school. Let's say psychologically safe. Could be physically too, but let's just say psychologically. Well, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to know? I mean, do you just feel it? And so you could just do something simple like have the kids fill in a little journal every Monday with a prompt, and then go through and sort of analyze them and look to see, based on what kids are saying, and give them a prompt that would surface psychological safety. And then analyze it and say how many kids look like they're psychologically safe and who doesn't. And we had a person who said they did that very thing, and they found that one of the kids they were working with was actually suicidal, and they were able to intervene with the kid because of what came up. But I mean, you can just look at it and try to guess it, but having data helps you see. And then there's other sort of specific things like that you're not aware of usually because of a whole host of reasons, defense mechanisms, perceptual errors, but just little things like how often do I give kids my attention in the classroom? And when I give them attention, how often is it because they're doing things well? And how often is it because I'm correcting them? And if the only thing I do is correct the students all the time, I don't really create a safe environment. And I actually, ironically, encourage them to keep doing it because my attention is a huge motivator. If the only way they can get my attention is by acting up, they're going to act up more, So those things are ways of setting goals and monitoring progress towards the goals. And for us, engagement is just as important as achievement, because engagement is why kids drop out. And if we want to be equitable in our schools, we want to create equitable schools, then kids need to feel like they belong. And so we would say, yes, achievement's important. Of course, we want kids to learn and progress academically, but it doesn't help if they're not in the school. So we want to also make sure they have a school they feel safe in, that they belong in and have hope.
Thank you, Jim. I think, bringing equity into the conversation as well, it just highlights how complex an educator's role is, and an administrator's role, and therefore a coach's role. But as we're talking, one thing that's really kind of emerged for me, Jim, is how instructional coaching sits on that middle ground, because as we were talking, it just occurred to me that we could say, look, it's so complex. It's just too complex. I don't know, we can't do it. It's, on the other hand, we've got some approaches which are, it's not that complex, it's easy. Let's just tell them what to do,
right,
kind of approach, which doesn't respect or honor the professionalism of educators. And I think instructional coaching and effective instructional coaches manage to work that line by saying, yes, it is complex and we can do something about it, which I think is a huge contribution. Jim, I've only got one question left for you. I'm kind of looking at the time as well.
Great.
And I've really appreciated this conversation. And as I've said, you're role modeling the partnership principles all the time. And it's just wonderful to talk to you, and your humility when you're, talking about your writing or your contribution is wonderful, because the writing is really amazing. And I'm not just saying that because we're friends. I've always found your writing to be clear, easy to understand, easy to implement. So thank you for that. The other aspect is you're always a learner. And I know that about you, Jim. You're always learning. You're always open to new learning. So for the last thing I just wanted to explore is, what did you learn, or what's become clearer to you in the process of writing this book?
I think my model for leadership really changed. And I'd always sort of seen leadership as something we do to others, and hadn't thought about the fact of leading myself until the more I thought about things like, the importance of self-compassion. And you're not going to do much good if you're so self-critical that you can't interact in a limit your capacity. And most people could do so much more than they realize if they weren't so self-critical. So that's a huge thing in terms of leadership. I would say, I could just probably go on and on, but I would say that what it's solidified for me is that the 7 things we identified are really important. People they need a set of beliefs that guide their practice, and beliefs that lead to mutually humanizing conversations. They need coaching skills. A person who doesn't listen very well and asks terrible questions is probably not an ideal coach. And then they need to have some leadership skills, in particular, that idea of balancing ambition with humility. They have their act together and they're deeply respectful of teachers. And then they need a coaching cycle. And then they need to know, well, what are the teaching strategies we're going to use in the coaching cycle? And have I got them organized so I can clearly communicate them? And then how am I going to measure goals and measure progress? So the cycle and the strategies and the data are really important. And then they need to work in a place where they actually have time to coach, and where people understand what they do. And when the principals talk to them about coaching, it's not like, just go do your thing. I mean, they have a deep enough understanding of what coaches do that there's this, because coaching should help you reach more kids. Coaching should make your life easier. And there shouldn't be such a thing as resistance. The concept of resistance shouldn't exist in coaching, because what I'm helping you do is do what you want to do. How do you resist against yourself? And I think to really start integrating what the research says about practices into schools in ways that are professional, that honor the professionalism of teachers, that are empowering as opposed to dehumanizing. Those 7 things come into play. The who I am, what I do, and where I work. Those things are really key. So I'd say that in writing the book, I deepen my belief that those 7 factors kind of function like a way of thinking about, are we there yet? Have we got the program we need?
Thank you, Jim. That idea of self-leadership, I loved it in the book as well, and splitting it, leading self, leading others. So I thought that was very insightful and so timely now for everyone listening, because we need self-leadership now more than ever coming out of this pandemic. And on the other hand, yes, that's why I think the title is appropriate. It is the definitive guide, because it's based on decades of research, your experiences, the experiences of educators and other coaches, and you're great at gathering the experiences of educators and coaches. So, Jim, it leaves me to say thank you so much for your commitment to what it is you do. Your purpose shines through. So thank you for that strong sense of purpose and commitment to education. We're all really grateful for it. And thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts today. It's been wonderful to have a chance just to talk and to hear your thoughts. Thank you, Jim.
Well, Christian, thank you. And you're so generous towards me, but you're the one who graciously agreed to take your time to helped me explain these ideas. And what I hope is a much more interesting way than a webinar where I go through one slide after the other and we have to see all these slides and things. So your feeling here is just evidence of your generosity. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation. We've got one coming up in a couple of days. So, so thank you so much.